Hi, welcome back to my channel. Thanks so much for joining me here at Happily in the Middle. Today I'm going to share with you, as part of my classroom management in the middle school classroom series, my rules and consequences and how I enforce those. Now, when I first started teaching, having high expectations was something I wanted to do, but I didn't really know how to do. I had read books, more like philosophical books in my credential program about classroom management, but they weren't very clear, and I felt like I was really unprepared for how to manage behavior in the classroom. I had it in my head that students should just know how to behave. And that's true. Kids should know to behave. They should know how to behave. But the truth is, you might end up in a school where there are a lot of children who just come from families that have different philosophies of what is acceptable for behavior. And every family is different, and that's okay. But I think it's also okay that you have expectations for what you believe is acceptable in your classroom. Now, I kind of feel like part of my responsibility as a teacher is to help students understand how we behave in different situations in different places in the world. So, for instance, when we get to college and we have to stand in line at financial aid, and we're there for 2 hours because we need money to help pay for college, you can't be in line playing loud music. You're not going to be on your phone. Speaking really loudly, using inappropriate language is not acceptable for an office setting. And so I feel like part of my responsibility as a teacher is to help teach my students how to navigate different situations in the world. And I want them to understand the role of everyday English and academic English, and when we apply those two different types of English, right? It's our BICs and our CALPs, or just understanding when to use what language. And so I think that all ties back into your expectations for behavior and classroom management. I'm going to share with you what my rules are. Now, I have my rules created on these pictures of memes. I just went to a website. I Googled a meme generator website, and I put my rules on memes. I'm not going to show you them because I don't know how copyright it works with like meme pictures, so I don't want to put them on there. I had a teacher friend who got sued for $1,000, so I'm not going to do that. But I will tell you what they look like, and I'll link down below the website I use so you could create your own. It's free to generate your own. Here we go. Rule number 1 with my classroom is students need to listen with their ears and their eyes. And I really emphasize that when we listen, I know that we're able to multitask, and we live in a world where people can multitask really well. Like, I can play on my phone and watch TV at the same time. But if I want to show respect, I need to listen with eyes and ears. Now, it seems like this should just work. I just tell my kids to do it, and they do, but it doesn't work. We actually have to practice listening with ears and eyes. And so we do this by turning and facing our partners when we do partner discussion. We do this by tossing a ball when people are talking, and they have to look at the person with their eyes and listen with their ears when that person is speaking. So this is a skill that they have to actually practice, and it's a lot of work in the beginning of the year, but I promise you, come February, when your kids know what your expectations are and how to behave, it saves you a lot of time. My second rule in the classroom is kafudi. If you haven't heard what that means, it basically means keep hands, feet, and other objects to yourself. And it's just like an acronym, kafudi, and the kids know what that means. So if I tell them we really need to practice kafudi right now, they know that that's my hands and my feet and other objects, which includes paper balls that they throw, pencils that get thrown, or just other things that, kids do, because middle school, we're all kind of weirdos, but I love them. That's why I teach middle school. We're all kind of weird there. Anyways, so just teaching them, keeping their hands and feet to themselves. And as part of that coming through the door routine that I shared with you back a couple of videos ago, we practice this. So if we're coming through the door and a student is behaving inappropriately and touching someone or touching someone's stuff, I send the entire classroom outside and we come back in again. Now, of course, you're always going to have kids who want to mess around and do it anyways, but I watch out for them and then I give them individual consequences, and they don't like that. Another rule that I have, third rule that I have is respect. Respect yourself, respect your classmates, and respect the teacher and other adults who come into the room. In my school, we get a lot of people who do walkthroughs. A lot of people, the principal, vice principal, come into my room. And so I expect students respect and show respect to everyone who comes into the room. I really emphasize that show respect to yourself rule because I want students to understand that when you are off task, you're disrespecting yourself. And my fourth rule, I only have 4 rules. My fourth rule in the classroom is to show responsibility. And so this is, you need to manage your own materials, you need to put your own materials away, you need to keep your space clean. And I really emphasize to them that it is not the janitor or maintenance person's job to clean up after you. Many kids think that that's what their job is, but it's not. Their job is to maintain the safety of our school and make sure our school looks nice, and they do help us by emptying the trash cans or vacuuming, but it is not their job to clean up after you. If you have dumped pencil shavings on the floor or ripped up a bunch of pieces of papers or spit sunflower seeds all over in your desk and on the floor, which I've had kids do, and I make them get down on their hands and knees and pick up every single piece. And they very quickly learn that they can't do that in my classroom. Now, with all of the rules in my classroom, I do always teach the consequences, and I have positive and negative consequences, and I make sure that my positive consequences far outweigh the negative consequences. And so I'll just share with you my consequence steps, I guess, and how I use those, and then all the positive consequences as well. So the first step in class, if you are misbehaving or breaking one of the classroom rules, the first one is a verbal warning. Now, depending on the kid, and you get to know your kids as you go, some kids can handle a public verbal warning and some kids can't. So for those kids who can't, I will make it a point to go over to them and quietly tell them, hey, you're off task or you're being disrespectful. This is a warning for whatever behavior you exhibited, and then I repeat what the rule of the classroom was. That makes it really clear that I've got my eye on you and I've seen what you've done and it was inappropriate. Now, the second step in consequences is a written behavior reflection, which also includes a parent signature part. So if the student is misbehaving again in the classroom and causing disruption or disrespect, now their parents are going to find out in a letter that goes home to the parents. And this does have to be signed by me so I can see and make sure that they have actually written the correct thing on their paper. And then I can either write a note or I can make them revise their writing to make their consequence, what they've done wrong clear. And then it is due the next day. If it does not come back the next day, I follow up with a phone call right there in class with the student. Step 3, after you've had your behavior reflection and your verbal warning, is a phone call home. And I do this right there in the classroom. Now, I have actually quite a few students whose parents do not speak English. And so I just send them up to the office, and the secretaries in the office, they support us doing this as long as I just call ahead and say, hey, can you help so-and-so make a phone call home to their parent about their behavior? The secretaries are more than happy to do that. And I do it right there in class so that one, the student knows that that behavior is unacceptable, and then the rest of the class knows as well that that behavior is not acceptable. 99% of the time, the parent is really supportive of that phone call because they want to know if their child is misbehaving in the classroom. Now, I typically just call home and I say something like, hi, this is Mrs. Kyle from our school, and I'm calling for the parent of the student's name, and I wait and I say, this is them, and I say, I'm so sorry to disturb you, but I have your child with me here in class. They've been causing disruptions and being disrespectful, and I wanted to know if you'd be willing to have a conversation with them about how we all support together your child making good and respectful choices in the classroom. 99% of the time, the parent will say, let me talk to them, and then you can kind of hear the phone out to hear as the child is listening to what the parent is saying. And it's very powerful, and the kid coming back the next day or the rest of that day that you have them, and even the week or weeks after, the more consistent you are with your behavior consequences, it really makes an impact on their behavior. Now, obviously, my goal is not to get kids in trouble. It's to help them learn and understand behavior expectations and the consequences for that. Now, the fourth step is a referral to the office, and this is all in line with my school's expected behavior plan as part of our PBIS model. So I basically just follow that plan. There's like documentation steps we make along the way every time I give that verbal warning or the letter or the phone call home, and then that last step is the referral to the office. Typically in the beginning of the school year, I do write referrals a lot more often than I normally do, but that's because I'm teaching students that I will follow through on my behavior expectations. And this year is actually the first year that I actually have not had to write a referral yet in the first 5 or 6 weeks of school, which is incredible to me. Normally by this point, I've written maybe 5 or 6 referrals. And I talk with my principal and they know this about me. I tend to be really hard on behavior expectations in the beginning, but come October, I typically maybe will write one referral a month if a kid has like a big blowout in the classroom, but I don't really write referrals after that for the rest of the year. Now, I think it's really important that you remember all kids are different, and so some of the students will not function well within your four-step behavior process. And so for those particular students, you might consider checking in their CUME files or seeing if they have an IEP or an SST. And oftentimes within those plans, there will be behavior expectations laid out and how those consequences are given. So for instance, last week I had a student who was having a really hard time and he ended up under his desk and crying. And he has his own behavior system of how we manage that. So, he would have really quickly gone to the office on a referral if he had been part of that traditional behavior four-step process. But for him, he needs to be held accountable in a different way that helps him be successful. Another student has an official plan for how we manage his anger outbursts. And so, again, he doesn't fall within that same four-step process per se. I mean, he does, and we do hold him accountable, but there's different ways I, as a teacher, respond and diffuse. And so I just want to make sure it's really clear to you that that plan doesn't necessarily work for every student, and you really have to get to know your kids and if they have any behavior plans on how those are organized. The last thing I'll share about that behavior consequence model is that for many kids, not many, maybe just a few, this is our tier 1, I think, that top of the triangle in RTI, or response to intervention. So these kids kind of live outside of this like bigger system. And so what I do with these kids is I have this little half sheet pink paper and they write their name at the top, and this stays in the classroom with me, but every day it sits on their desk, and it has Monday through Friday, and it has a place for them to mark and check and monitor how many warnings they've received in the classroom. So they are still held accountable to those 4 steps on the behavior process, but they get an added layer of that pink paper that sits on their desk so they can visually see how many warnings they've had, because kids used to tell me all the time, well, I forgot how many warnings I had, I didn't know. So I made this paper for them to track that, and it has to be signed by their parent on Fridays, and it comes back on Monday, or I make a phone call home. And so in order for a student to get that, typically they've had like 1 or 2 referrals, or just their behavior is really hard to manage, and their parents, I'm having to constantly call them. So I talk with their parents, I do let them know I'm going to put them on this little behavior reflection in class so they can see their consequences, and it sits on their desk the whole period. And in order for this paper to go away, they need a full week of nothing more than a warning. So they can get a warning every day of the week, but if it doesn't go beyond that, then they don't have to have the tracking paper anymore. But if they get a second warning or a behavior reflection, then they've got to have it for a week straight of no consequences beyond a warning, if that makes sense. So, I mean, I'm happy to share that if anyone is interested in that. It's really effective for those harder to manage students who they don't have an IEP, they don't have an SST, they're just really hard to manage in the classroom. Now for positive consequences. I use Class Dojo, and I think this is a total another video by itself, but I use Class Dojo to reward and track and manage positive consequences in the class. So anytime students are on task, I give them a point for being on task. Every single time a student volunteers or participates, or I randomly call on them because it's a feature in Class Dojo, they get a participation point. Anytime I catch someone being helpful to another student, I make a huge deal like, oh my gosh, that was so thoughtful and kind. I'm going to give you a helper point for that. I give them a point in Class Dojo. And students who help me pass out papers, like kids, who have jobs, kids who do things without me asking, kids who make a donation to the class, like boxes of tissues, because our district doesn't provide them for us, they get Class Dojo points. Every time that students show creativity or they're showing persistence when something is really hard, I reward them. And I do not track negative behaviors in Class Dojo. That's a personal philosophical choice, kind of like, if I show up to work and have a bad day and I'm like gruff with one of my employees, not one of the other employees or my colleagues at work, my principal's not going to take my money away from my paycheck. So that's kind of how I felt about it. And I feel like the kids who need those positive points to be able to spend in our Class Dojo store, the kids who need that the most are typically the kids who often will lose all of their points, and then they won't have any points to spend in the store, which kind of defeats the purpose of them getting rewarded for their good choices. So that's kind of how I do that. And I will sometimes have the sound on and sometimes have the sound off, and because I think the sound can be distracting when it does a little ding for kids. So I try to do that when it makes sense. Now, kids can earn individual points, and they can earn 20, 25 points in a week or even more than that, depending on what they're doing. Every time they pass a book quiz and read 180, every time they pass a segment or complete a topic, they all get different levels of points for that. So they could really earn 30, even 40 points in a week. And so every other week, I open the Class Dojo store and kids can spend their points individually on prizes. A lot of them are free things to me, like take your shoes off for the day, sit on the carpet for reading, switch spots and sit by your friend, or pick a prize from the dojo prize box, or buy a piece of candy or a pencil. So they're really inexpensive things. Most of them are free. And I also do a points on the board for whole class. And now that's a really long explanation too, but basically, the short story is the cumulative points that kids earn as a class gets them whole class community rewards. So these are things like, I think I gave each kid a bookmark at 500 points, each kid a pencil at 1,000, each kid a pen at 1,500. And then from that point on, it's every 1,000 points. They get something like a cookie or a game in the classroom that we can play together for 15 minutes, or 15 minutes of a show like Shaun the Sheep, which I love because every kid gets no matter what their linguistic background is. I think at 10,000 points, we get a field trip to the park, which is 2 blocks away from our school, and we'll go read in the park that day. One of them is we get a movie that's the end of the year celebration, which we're going to do anyways. But they're working hard to earn that because they want that reward. I actually just asked the students what they wanted as far as rewards go, and those are the ideas they picked. A popcorn party, which popcorn is really inexpensive, or just 15 minutes or 10 minutes to play on the Chromebook, and they play games like Nitro Type that actually develop their typing skills anyways. So it's a really, really good tool, and I will subtract points on the board, but I never enter those into Class Dojo. I just make sure I even out the positive and the negative points, and then I just erase, one negative for one positive, but I never enter that in Class Dojo because I only use Class Dojo to celebrate positive rewards and to connect with parents. So I hope those ideas were helpful of how I manage behavior and consequences in the classroom. Let me know if there's any other good tips you have, or maybe you have some good feedback for me. I think the most important thing is whatever you do, consistency is key. Now, I know sometimes it can be so overwhelming where it feels like every kid in your class is misbehaving. Just pick them out one by one. And when they argue with you, give them the next consequence, because they need to know that you are the authority or the boss in the class. I've gone as far as making kids point to who's in charge of the classroom because I had kids who thought they were the boss in the room. So whatever you need to do to make your class run, be consistent with that. because the more consistent you are, the more students will trust you. And just trust me on this, discipline and holding kids accountable to their choices is an act of love, and kids will still like you for it. They will, in fact, feel connected to you because you care about them and their education and their behaviors and the success that they will have in the future. Thanks so much for joining me here. Have a great day.